When the Johnson family found the strange, hairless dog wandering near the beach, they thought he was simply abandoned, lonely, fragile, misunderstood. The kids fell in love with him instantly. His dark, smooth skin, golden eyes, and unusually silent behavior made him look different. But harmless. They had no idea what they were bringing into their home. For the first few days, the dog didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't even play. He just watched, alert, intelligent, almost calculating. At night, he paced the hallway as if guarding something unseen. And every time the family tried to get close, he stiffened, as if trained for something far more dangerous than fetching a stick. But the real shock came when they took him to the vet for a routine checkup. The vet examined him, froze, stepped back, and immediately called the police. What they discovered next shook the entire town. Stay with me. The story gets darker. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The Johnson family had only planned a quiet afternoon at the beach, a simple escape from chores, homework, and the noise of everyday life. But then Mia stopped. "Mom! Dad, look!" Her voice held a strange mix of excitement and concern. The family turned toward the rocky edge of the beach, where a dark shape stood perfectly still. At first glance, it looked like a statue, tall, sleek, unmoving. But then it shifted, lifting its narrow head, revealing sharp golden eyes that glinted under the sunlight. It wasn't a statue. It was a dog, a very strange-looking dog. Its skin was smooth, hairless, almost black-blue in color, and it glistened under the sun like polished stone. Its ears stood tall and pointed. The shape of its skull gave it an almost ancient, mythical appearance, as if it belonged to another world entirely. Is he okay?" Ethan whispered. The dog didn't bark, didn't whine, didn't move toward them. It simply watched, silent and alert. Something about the way it stood, perfectly balanced, perfectly still, sent a ripple of unease through Mr. Johnson. The kids, however, felt none of that. "Can we help him?" Mia begged, already taking a cautious step forward. The dog lowered its head slightly, not in aggression, almost in recognition, as if saying he understood them. Mrs. Johnson's heart softened. The creature looked tired, dehydrated, lost. No collar, no leash, no owner in sight. And despite its intimidating appearance, there was something undeniably lonely in its eyes. "Maybe he's been abandoned," she murmured. The kids moved closer, slow and gentle. The dog didn't back away, didn't show fear. He simply stood there, watching them with a silent patience that felt strangely human. And in that moment, without knowing anything about him, the Johnsons made a decision that would change their lives forever. The drive home felt strange in a way the Johnson family couldn't quite explain. The dog sat in the back of the SUV beside Ethan and Mia, but unlike other rescued animals, he didn't tremble, sniff around, or try to climb onto their laps. He sat perfectly still, spine straight, eyes fixed on the road ahead like a silent guardian on duty. "Shouldn't he, move?" Ethan whispered. Mia reached out to touch him, but the dog gently turned his head away, not aggressive, not scared, just controlled, like he'd been trained to maintain boundaries. When they pulled into the driveway, the dog hopped out without waiting for permission. He didn't bolt, didn't explore, didn't sniff the grass. Instead, he stood beside the car and scanned the neighborhood, every house, every corner, every movement. Mr. Johnson frowned. That's not normal dog behavior. Inside the house, things got even stranger. Mrs. Johnson prepared a bowl of dog food, but the dog didn't touch it. He didn't even lean down to sniff it. Instead, he paced slowly around the kitchen perimeter, nose close to the baseboards as if checking for something invisible. The dog didn't react at all. It wasn't disinterest. It was something else. Something colder. More deliberate. Later, while the kids watched cartoons, the dog positioned himself near the front door. Sitting upright, head high, muscles tense beneath his smooth, dark skin. Maybe he's just nervous, Mrs. Johnson said. Though even she didn't believe her own words. Mr. Johnson crouched beside him. Hey buddy. You're home now. You can relax. The dog blinked once, slowly. Relax? He didn't understand the word, because whatever this creature had been through, whatever he was trained for, he wasn't here to relax, he was here to watch. That first night, the Johnsons expected the strange dog to curl up somewhere soft, maybe the couch, maybe the rug, maybe at the foot of the kids' beds. That's what normal rescue dogs did. They sought comfort, warmth, safety. But this dog did none of those things. Mr. Johnson awoke around midnight to the faint sound of claws tapping softly against the hallway floor. He sat up listening. The sound wasn't frantic or playful. It was measured, precise, a pattern. Tap, tap, tap. Pause, tap, tap. He stepped out of the bedroom and froze. The dog stood in the hallway, perfectly still, facing the front door. His posture was stiff, muscles taut, ears lifted like radar dishes. His eyes glowed faintly under the moonlight, seeping through the window. Hey, you okay, boy? Mr. Johnson whispered. The dog didn't turn around, didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge him at all. Instead, he moved slowly toward the living room, each step calculated, silent. Not like a lost pet adjusting to a new environment, like a trained operative securing a perimeter. Mrs. Johnson, drawn by the sound, joined her husband. Is he patrolling? They watched as the dog moved into the kids' hallway next. He paused at Mia's door, listened intently, then stepped away, not entering, not sniffing her toys, not acting curious. Just assessing. The dog then stopped at a small window facing the backyard. His ears twitched. A low, rumbling growl built in his chest, soft but unmistakably protective. Mr. Johnson swallowed. What's he hearing? The dog didn't answer, but his body remained locked onto something. Outside, something only he could sense. And when the night stretched deeper and darker, one chilling truth became undeniable. This wasn't a pet adjusting to a home. This was a soldier returning to duty. By the following morning, the Johnsons convinced themselves that the dog's nighttime behavior was just anxiety, or maybe some leftover fear from whatever life he had before. The kids still adored him, even though he wouldn't play or cuddle. They tried again, rolling a ball gently across the living room. Come on, boy. Ethan encouraged. The ball bumped against the dog's front paw. He didn't even glance at it. Instead, his eyes were fixed on Ethan's hands, studying every movement with a focus far too intense for a normal dog. Mia lifted her hand in a playful wave, and to everyone's surprise, the dog immediately sat down. Mrs. Johnson blinked. Did he just follow a command? No way, Ethan said. We didn't even teach him that. Curious, Mia raised both hands. The dog instantly stood. Ethan crouched. The dog lowered himself to the floor. Mr. Johnson's stomach tightened. These are hand signals. Military style. The dog looked between each of them with unnerving intelligence, as if evaluating their reactions. His golden eyes weren't curious, they were calculating, reading the room like he was gathering data. Later that afternoon, Mr. Johnson stepped outside to take out the trash. The moment the door opened, the dog appeared behind him silently, as if materializing from thin air. He positioned himself beside the doorway, watching the yard with narrowed eyes, but the dog didn't relax. He scanned the trees behind the fence, head tilting as if listening for something beyond human hearing. When Mr. Johnson closed the trash bin lid, quickly and loudly, the dog spun instantly, dropping into a low, defensive stance. No bark, no panic. Just readiness. Controlled. Trained. Mrs. Johnson noticed later, that he avoided every mirror in the house, angling his body so he would never confront his own reflection. Not fear, awareness. Something's different about him, she whispered. Mr. Johnson nodded slowly, watching the dog patrol the yard like a seasoned guard. Different? He murmured. No. He's something else entirely. And though the family didn't know it yet, they weren't living with a stray. They were living with a secret. Despite the strange behavior, Ethan and Mia fell in love with the mysterious dog faster than anyone expected. To them, he wasn't intimidating, he was misunderstood. A silent guardian who didn't know how to be a normal pet yet. They gave him a name. Shadow. Shadow didn't respond to it verbally. He didn't wag his tail or perk up when called. But when Mia whispered, "Shadow, come here," in her gentlest voice, he turned his head, not out of obedience, but acknowledgement. As if he respected her effort. Mrs. Johnson's heart melted watching her kids sit beside him on the rug. Shadow didn't cuddle, but he allowed them to rest against him, his body still but solid, like a warm pillar of protection. He must have had a rough life, Mrs. Johnson murmured to her husband. Maybe he's scared of messing up. Or maybe, Mr. Johnson replied quietly, he was trained not to show weakness. But they chalked it up to trauma anyway. A stray abandoned by cruel owners. A dog who never learned how to play. A survivor who needed patience and love to relearn trust. Shadow tolerated baths, though he watched every movement carefully. He tolerated meals but only ate when the house was quiet. He tolerated affection, but always on his terms, never letting anyone approach from behind. His behavior was strange, yet he never once showed aggression toward the children. In fact, when Mia tripped while running, Shadow sprinted to her side in an instant, standing over her like a shield until she sat up. Double quotes, see. Mia beamed. He's a good boy. And he was, just not in the way they understood. Shadow wasn't learning to trust them. He was learning to protect them, every day. His watchfulness grew sharper. Every night, his patrols grew longer. And every instinct in him, every trained reflex, was shifting toward one purpose. Safeguarding his new family, even if he had once belonged to a world far more dangerous than they could imagine. It happened on the fifth day. The Johnsons were grilling in the backyard. The kids tossing a frisbee while Shadow watched from the shaded porch, silent, observant, always calculating. Mrs. Johnson placed a plate on the patio table when she noticed. Shadow suddenly stiffened. His ears flicked. His head turned sharply toward the far corner of the yard. Then, without warning, he sprinted. "Shadow?" Ethan called. "What is it, boy?" But Shadow wasn't listening. He zeroed in on a patch of dirt near the old oak tree, a place no one had touched in years. He began digging fast, powerful claws throwing soil in every direction. Not frantic digging. Not playful digging. This was targeted. Purposeful. He knew exactly what he was looking for. Mr. Johnson jogged over, waving his hands. "Hey, stop. Shadow, leave it." Shadow ignored him completely, something he had never done before. Within seconds, something metallic glinted beneath the churned-up soil. Shadow grabbed it gently in his mouth, carried it to the grass, and dropped it at Mr. Johnson's feet. The family froze. It wasn't a bone, not a toy, not a random piece of trash. It was a broken tracking collar, thick, reinforced, military-grade. Mrs. Johnson crouched down, brushing dirt off the scratched metal plate. Her eyes widened as she read the tiny engraved text, serial code, XR7BDO, not REMOV property. Of the rest was scratched off, violently, as if someone had tried to hide the origin. Shadow sat beside it, staring up at the family with those unreadable golden eyes, waiting for them to understand. Ethan whispered, "Mom, this looks like something from a spy movie." Mr. Johnson swallowed hard. "This isn't normal military gear. This is specialized." Shadow nudged the collar once with his nose, then turned his head toward the woods behind the fence, the same direction he stared at during his nightly patrols. A chill crawled up Mrs. Johnson's spine. What was he warning them about? And more importantly, who had once owned a dog wearing a collar like this? After discovering the strange metal collar, the Johnsons tried to convince themselves it was nothing. Maybe a discarded piece of equipment from a neighboring property, or something Shadow had dug up at random. But deep down, Mr. Johnson couldn't shake the feeling that the dog wasn't just a stray. So the next morning, they decided to do the responsible thing. Take Shadow to the local veterinary clinic for a full checkup. Shadow didn't resist the leash. He walked calmly beside them, though his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. Every car that passed, every pedestrian, every sound. He didn't behave like a dog going for a checkup. He behaved like a bodyguard, escorting a family into unknown territory. Inside the clinic, the receptionist smiled warmly. What a unique-looking pup. What breed is he? The Johnsons exchanged awkward glances. We actually don't know, Mrs. Johnson admitted. Shadow sat beside the counter, back straight, eyes unblinking. A toddler in the waiting area toddled toward him with a squeaky toy. Shadow didn't move, didn't flinch. He simply watched the child with a calm, eerie focus until the mother gently pulled her son back. A few minutes later, Dr. Harris, a seasoned veterinarian with decades of experience, ushered them into the exam room. Well, aren't you a handsome boy? The vet said. Crouching down, Shadow didn't respond with sniffing or wagging. He just stared at the doctor. UNMOVING. Dr. Harris chuckled nervously. Not much of a talker, huh? He began the usual routine, checking teeth, skin, heartbeat. But right away, something bothered him. Shadow's heartbeat was steady, too steady. His muscles were unusually dense. His breathing was controlled like a trained athlete. This dog isn't malnourished, the vet murmured. He's conditioned. The Johnsons exchanged uneasy glances. The vet continued examining the dog's chest. His fingers paused. He frowned. Then he moved to the dog's neck. Paused again. Strange. He muttered. Shadow's eyes narrowed. Then the vet straightened. Wiping his hands, his expression suddenly tight. I think we should run an X-ray, he said quietly. And that's when the first real alarm bell went off. The hum of the X-ray machine filled the small back room with a cold, clinical tension. Shadow stood on the metal table without being held, perfectly still, as if he'd done this 100 times before. No shaking, no fear, no confusion. His eyes followed every movement the technician made, measured. Calculating, alert. Dr. Harris watched the dog's behavior with narrowed eyes. Most dogs need sedation for X-rays, he murmured. But not him. Minutes later, the X-ray images appeared on the screen. The room went silent. Mrs. Johnson leaned forward. Is everything okay? Dr. Harris didn't answer. He zoomed in on Shadow's ribcage, then his shoulders, then his spine. His breath hitched. What on earth? He whispered. Embedded along Shadow's backbone were small metallic fragments, cleanly shaped, evenly spaced. Not accidental. Not shrapnel from an injury. These were surgical implants. Ethan frowned. What are those, bones? No, the vet said slowly. Not bones. Not natural. He clicked to another image. Shadow's left shoulder showed healed fractures, old, but clearly from powerful impact. His chest displayed scarring that matched trauma from controlled environments, not random accidents. And then the vet zoomed in on the neck. There it was. A microchip, but not a normal pet. Microchip. The code began with XR7B. Mrs. Johnson gasped. That's the same code from the collar he dug up. Dr. Harris swallowed hard and stepped back from the monitor as if the image itself was dangerous. This isn't a stray. This dog has undergone modifications I've never seen in domestic animals. Shadow suddenly shifted, stepping closer to the Johnsons. positioning himself between them and the vet protecting them. Dr. Harris froze. He took one slow step backward. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson," he said, voice trembling, "I need you all to stay right here." He reached for his phone. "What are you doing?" Mr. Johnson asked. The vet didn't blink. "I'm calling the police." Dr. Harris's hands trembled as he stepped into the hallway, closing the exam room door behind him with a soft but deliberate click. Through the small glass window, the Johnsons watched him disappear around the corner, phone pressed tightly to his ear. Shadow's ears twitched immediately. His body stiffened, head lowering, every muscle primed. Why is he calling the police? Mrs. Johnson whispered, fear creeping into her voice. Shadow moved slightly in front of her, protective, on guard, as if sensing the tension radiating through the walls. On the other side of the door, muffled but unmistakable, Dr. Harris's voice carried through the silence. "Yes, I'm sure," he said urgently. "No, not injured, modified. You need to get here immediately." Mr. Johnson felt his stomach twist. Modified? What does that even mean? Before anyone could answer, the door handle rattled. The vet reappeared, his face pale. I need you to stay in this room," he said, locking the door from the inside. "For your safety." Ethan's voice cracked. "Are we in danger?" The vet didn't respond. Shadow growled quietly, not at the family, but toward the hallway, nose lifted as if detecting something approaching. Mrs. Johnson hugged the kids close. "Doctor, what's going on?" Dr. Harris swallowed hard. "That microchip. I tried to scan it. It didn't register in any domestic animal database. So I ran it through a secondary system I have access to. It connected to a restricted network." "A restricted network?" Mr. Johnson repeated. The vet nodded slowly. "Military. Possibly federal." Mia's small hand clung to Shadow's back, seeking comfort. But Shadow wasn't comforting, he was preparing. His stance dropped low, tail straight, eyes fixed on the door as footsteps approached from the outside hallway. A loud knock made everyone jump. Police department. "Open up." But Shadow barked, sharply, defensively, blocking the family from the door. This wasn't relief, this wasn't safety. Something about those footsteps, those voices, those scents, Shadow didn't trust them. And for the first time, neither did the Johnsons. The knock on the door echoed through the small exam room like a thunderclap. Mrs. Johnson jumped, pulling the kids close. Dr. Harris hesitated, his eyes flicking uneasily toward Shadow, who now stood rigid, positioned between the family and the entrance like a shield carved from stone. "Police," a voice repeated. "Open the door." The vet exhaled shakily and reached for the handle. "Stay behind the dog," he warned. "Whatever happens, don't make sudden movements." When he opened the door, 2 officers stepped inside, uniforms crisp, posture stiff, movements strangely synchronized. Their eyes didn't go to the family first, or even the vet. They went straight to Shadow. One officer frowned. "That's him." The Johnsons exchanged confused looks. "Him?" Mr. Johnson asked. "What do you mean, him?" The second officer pulled out a small device, not a regular scanner, something more advanced. It beeped when pointed at Shadow, flashing a red signal. "All right," the officer said firmly. "Back away from the dog." Shadow's growl vibrated through the floor, deep and warning. He lowered his head, narrowing his golden eyes. The officers tensed immediately, hands drifting toward their belts. Mrs. Johnson stepped forward defensively. "Stop! Why are you talking like he's dangerous?" The first officer's jaw tightened. "Because that dog isn't what you think. He's not a stray, he's not abandoned. He's a missing federal asset." The room froze. Federal what?" Ethan whispered, eyes wide. The officer nodded grimly. "This animal was part of an undercover canine division, experimental, high-risk operations only. He vanished months ago during a raid. We assumed he'd been killed. Shadow barked sharply, stepping protectively in front of Mia as if warning the officers to stay back. But now, the second officer continued, we know he didn't die. He stared at the dog with something between awe and fear. He escaped. The Johnson's breath caught. Escaped from what? Mr. Johnson demanded. The officer hesitated before answering. A criminal syndicate that trains and weaponizes animals. And they don't let their assets go. Shadow barked again, louder this time, because he knew exactly what was coming next. The moment the officer stepped closer, something inside Shadow switched. It wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It was recognition. A deep, vibrating growl rumbled through his chest. Low, controlled, but powerful enough to make both officers stop mid-step. His ears flattened. His stance tightened. And every muscle along his body rose like drawn wire. Easy, boy. The first officer murmured, though he didn't sound confident. His hand hovered near his holster. Shadow didn't blink. He moved subtly sideways, placing himself directly between the Johnson children and the approaching officers. His eyes never left their hands, tracking every twitch, every shift, every breath. Mrs. Johnson instinctively clutched Mia's shoulder. Why is he acting like this? He's never behaved aggressively toward anyone. Because he remembers us, the second officer replied quietly. Or rather, he remembers what we're connected to. Mr. Johnson's eyebrows knitted. Explain. But before the officer could speak, the first took another cautious step forward, and Shadow exploded into a bark, so sharp and forceful the entire room jolted. Back! Ryan barked, stumbling. Shadow didn't advance. He didn't attack. He simply held the line, defending the family with the discipline of a trained protector. The officer lifted both hands slowly. He's identifying us as a threat. Federal K-9s are trained to sense hostility, codes, changes in uniform scent. Whatever this dog went through, he associates our department with danger. He's protecting you, the second officer added, glancing at the Johnsons. Which means he's chosen you. Shadow didn't look away from them, but his tail lowered slightly, confirming the truth. He wasn't being aggressive. He was being loyal. Ethan stepped closer, heart pounding. Shadow, is he scared? The officer shook his head. No, he's preparing for something. This level of defensive posture. He thinks someone is coming. Shadow suddenly raised his head toward the window, nostrils flaring. Body stiffening. The vet whispered, voice trembling, he smells something. And for the first time since adopting him, the Johnson family realized Shadow wasn't protecting them from the police. He was preparing them for the real danger that was on its way. The room fell into a strained, breathless silence as Shadow stared toward the window. Body rigid, nose twitching at a scent only he could detect. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, the kind that told everyone this situation was far bigger than a routine recovery of a missing K-9. Mr. Johnson stepped forward. You keep saying he's a federal asset. That he escaped. Escaped from what exactly? The first officer exhaled sharply, running a hand down his face. All right. You deserve the truth. He motioned for the family to sit, but Shadow refused to move from his guard position, standing firmly between them and the door. His golden eyes flicked between the officers like he was rating their threat levels. The second officer began quietly. Months ago, our intelligence division uncovered a criminal syndicate specializing in illegal experiments, modifying animals for high-risk operations. Dogs mostly. Rare breeds. Ones with intelligence and physical traits suited for tactical use. Mia clutched Shadow's back, horrified. Experiments. Like hurting them. Worse, the officer replied. Training them to follow silent commands, track targets, withstand pain, and even assist in covert transport of contraband. These animals weren't pets. They were tools. Mrs. Johnson covered her mouth. My God! The officer nodded grimly. Shadow was one of those dogs, except he wasn't fully compliant. They pushed him too hard. He broke free during a raid, but by the time we got inside, he was gone. We thought he didn't make it. There was blood, shattered cages, tranquilizer darts everywhere. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. So he escaped because he wanted to live? The officer shook his head. No, he escaped because he refused to follow their commands. That makes him extremely valuable to them, and extremely dangerous to them. Shadow growled again, low, ominous. They'll want him back, the officer continued. Not because they care about him, but because he knows too much. Mr. Johnson's heart dropped. You mean, they might come after us? Shadow lifted his head slowly, and barked once toward the window, not in fear, in warning. The officers exchanged tense glances as Shadow's bark vibrated through the room, sharp and unmistakably alert. He wasn't reacting to the police anymore. His attention was fixed entirely on whatever waited outside. His body angled toward the window, ears rotating like satellite dishes, nostrils flaring as he pulled in scents invisible to everyone else. What's out there? Mia whispered. Shadow growled. A low, vibrating sound that sent chills up every spine in the room. Then a car door slammed outside. Then another dot. Then footsteps. Several sets. Slow, heavy, purposeful. The second officer moved toward the window and peeled back the blinds just an inch, his face drained of color. Oh no. What is it? Mr. Johnson demanded. The officer swallowed. They're here. Mrs. Johnson felt her knees weaken. Who's here? Men affiliated with the syndicate, the officer said. We've seen them before. They're hunters. They reclaim escaped assets. Ethan stepped closer to Shadow, voice shaking. They want him back. The officer nodded grimly. And they'll do whatever it takes. The footsteps grew louder, pacing the parking lot, circling the building, pausing near every door. Shadow pressed his head against the bottom of the door, sniffing, muscles trembling with controlled intensity. They followed his scent. The vet whispered, realizing the horrifying truth. He led them here. A shadow passed across the frosted glass window of the clinic hallway, then a second, then someone tried the front door. The handle rattled. Everyone froze. Move. Away from the windows, the officer ordered. Now, he clicked his radio. Dispatch, we need backup at Millside Veterinary Clinic. Federal priority. Immediate threat. Repeat. Immediate threat. Static crackled in response. Outside. The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed against the building like a held breath. Then, a tap on the window. Soft. Deliberate. Like a message. Shadow erupted into a fierce bark, throwing himself between the family and the door. His stance wasn't fear, it was readiness, because the danger wasn't coming. It had already arrived. The tapping on the window turned into a sudden, violent bang. The entire clinic jumped. Mia screamed, clinging to her mother as Shadow lunged toward the sound, barking with explosive force that shook the walls. Everyone back. The officer yelled. Before they could move, a second bang rattled the back door. Then a third on the side entrance. Whoever was outside wasn't trying to sneak in anymore. They were surrounding the building. Shadow positioned himself between the family and the doors, moving like a trained operative, pivoting, analyzing, defending. His growls deepened into a warning. The intruders clearly understood, because the banging paused for a moment. Then glass shattered. A side window burst inward as a gloved arm reached through, trying to unlock the latch. The officer closest to it drew his weapon. Stop, federal police! But the intruder didn't stop. Shadow reacted first. With a snarling leap, he launched across the room, slamming into the window frame. His jaws clamped onto the man's sleeve, yanking him back with such force the intruder lost his grip and stumbled outside. Another man grabbed at Shadow through the broken glass, but Shadow twisted, teeth flashing, tearing away from him without getting cut. "Shadow, back!" Ryan ordered, but Shadow didn't retreat. He repositioned, blocking the broken window with his body, daring the attackers to try again. Suddenly, more shadows moved, outside figures sprinting toward the clinic doors. The officers braced. "Get the family into the supply room. Go, go." Shadow herded the Johnsons toward the hallway before anyone even spoke. He nudged Mia with his nose, guiding her behind him, never turning his back to the threat. The moment the family reached the supply room, another intruder kicked the back door. The hinges buckled. Shadow spun, placing himself between the doorway and the terrified children. His body lowered into a stance the Johnsons had never seen before, a stance of a trained, elite defender. The door cracked open. Shadow growled, deep and final.